Hey everybody, it's Kim West, the Sleep Lady, and in this episode of the Gentle Parenting Show, I'm so honored to have back my colleague and one of my gentle sleep coaches, Macall Gordon. She came on an earlier episode and we talked about the research on infant sleep and sleep training, and today she's talking about probably her favorite topic, which is temperament and sleep.
That's right.
Just a little bit about Macall's background. She has her master's in applied psychology from Antioch University, Seattle, with a specialization in infant mental health, including attachment theory, the development of emotional regulation, and parenting psychology. She also has a BS in human biology from Stanford University, and she's currently a senior lecturer in the graduate counseling psychology program at Antioch University, Seattle.
Mhm.
And she's done a lot of research herself about about temperament
Well,
and the review of the research.
yeah,
That's what I
that's
meant
right.
to
Yes,
say.
yeah, it's true.
And so I just wanted to have her come out here and because really there's some, books and information out
Sure.
there, and we're certainly seeing more in the last 10 years than we
Yeah.
used to see.
Hmm.
But there's definitely room for more. And
Yeah.
as I've shared with you and my other coaches, these what I called alert babies, just
Hmm.
because I made up the
Yeah,
word,
that's right.
they were like 75% of my practice.
Yeah.
And so I want to talk about what you found in your recent research on
Yeah.
temperament. And
Yeah.
I know you call them a different name, which I
Yeah.
really love. You call them
Yeah.
live wires.
Live wires. Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah.
please tell us
Of
what you
course.
learned.
Sure. Well,
Mhm.
what you said is 100% so true that, um, and I think if we surveyed our coaches, we'd find the same thing that I more and more am starting to really think that the dividing line between kiddos who sleep and kiddos who don't is temperament. Because I
Mhm.
mean, partly as coaches, we're not going to see the ones that sleep easily and well. We're only going to see people who have tried a bunch of things and the kids not sleeping. So I really do think that these are the children who have kind of a thinner skin. They're more alert. I think it's a great word. They're just on. They're just kind of on,
Mhm.
most of the time. The sad thing I think is that it's the folks who have easier babies think that it's because of something they did, right? They're like, parents of live wires or intense kids have other folks saying to them all the time, well, if you just let them cry, if you just
Right.
stop picking them up so much, if you just don't hold them all the time, your child won't be like this. And that's such a it's such a disservice, right, to these parents, because it's just not true.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I
So,
always thought of these kids like their filter to the world is open
yeah,
wider than
totally.
everybody else's. And,
Totally.
leaving them to like figure it out on your own,
Right.
you know, is seems
Yeah.
impossible.
Right.
Hmm.
Well, and that's we talk about these kids can't, parents will say, oh, they just can't self-soothe. They just can't self-soothe. And it's like, well, they can't for exactly the reason that you just mentioned, right? Like I say, if I gave you a 10-pound bag of sugar, you could carry it around pretty capably. If I gave you a
Hmm.
100-pound sack of concrete and you dropped it, we'd be like, well, you just can't carry stuff. And it's like,
Right.
no, there's just more to manage. And these kids with the filters more open, they're taking in more information, they're taking in more stimuli, they just have more to deal with. So then it's
Hmm.
not so much that they can't self-soothe, it's just that their whatever skills they have aren't big enough to deal with the
Hmm.
amount of input that they're taking in all the time. So
Hmm.
we as parents have to step in more frequently to help them with it, because listen, kids have small toolboxes, especially in the early
Hmm.
months. I'm like, in
Hmm.
the early months they've got nothing, they've got almost nothing.
Right.
They they're To really self-soothe requires motor skills, visual skills, attention skills. You have to be able to divert your attention away from the thing that's bothering you. All those things take time, and when the things that are
Yeah.
bothering you are more intense, you need even more help to sort of downshift from that. And which is why I think these kids have so many problems with sleep, just like
Yeah.
ridiculously huge problems with sleep, because they just don't turn away, right?
Yeah. So maybe, for listeners, maybe you could go over what you have found
Yeah.
are some of the typical characteristics.
Perfect. Yeah. So, uh, I mean, I can, what I like to talk about usually is what I always hear from parents. It's like almost like a little mental checklist where they just have to say one of these things. And I go, okay, I know who we're dealing with.
Hmm.
So, the first one is, intensity, or I like to just say big feelings, right? Because
Hmm.
intensity, sometimes people think of as, only negative emotions, but
Yeah.
these kids have big everything. If they're happy, they're really happy. If they're sad, mad, they're really, really mad. So it's big feelings. Um, Sensitivity, meaning, usually it's sensory sensitivity. So little sounds, little textures, it- light, different things bother them. Um, Parents will say that the thing they say under that heading is like, I can get her dead asleep, and the second her back hits the crib mattress, she's awake. She's just
Hmm.
awake, and I have to start all
Hmm.
over again. So it's like, I kind of call it the princess and the pea syndrome, right? Like just the
Hmm.
littlest little thing, she can't sleep. Persistent. So the parents will say, never gives up. Never gives up. Just we'll
Right.
cry for hours if we were going to do that, right?
Hmm.
Um, Perceptive, doesn't miss a thing. They'll say
Hmm.
that, or they'll say it's like she has FOMO, so
Hmm.
fear of missing out, right? At the
Hmm.
minute a parent says FOMO, I'm like, okay, here we
Hmm.
go.
Hmm.
So these kiddos just do not want to go to sleep. It's like they just have better things to do. Even as
Right.
little babies, the parents will say this, like a 3-month-old baby, they'll say she does not want to go to sleep because it's like she's afraid she'll miss something.
Hmm.
Okay,
I
we know
remember
who
when
that
my
is.
younger one was, you know, like between 3, 4, 5 months of age.
Yeah.
And it was a little eerie because I sometimes felt like she understood everything we were talking about
Right.
and was videotaping it in her mind.
Yeah. Right. And you know that technically that's not possible, but
Right.
right, exactly. Yeah. I remember my first indication, and I didn't know because it was my first child, was after I had a very long hard labor, and she had to be in the nursery for a few hours or something. And they wheeled her into me like the little baby burrito in those little glass
Hmm.
things. And they
Hmm.
wheeled her into me, and her eyes were like this, like
Hmm.
like laser beams, not that kind of fuzzy newborn thing that you expect. And I remember seeing that and going, that's not normal, is it? Our newborn's supposed to do that? And then I was like, oh, well, what do I know? I'm just a new mom. And looking back, it's like, well, there we go, right? So
Right.
she seemed to, even as a teeny tiny baby, crave interaction, crave sights and
Hmm.
images and colors, and yet she also then didn't know what to do with it when she had it. So she also couldn't break away from it once she had had enough. And
Hmm.
that's, I think, part of these kids too, is they have a huge desire for interaction and things happening, but then they also don't have that break. They don't know how
Yeah.
to say, okay, their brain doesn't shut off when they've had enough. And then they
Yeah.
can get really easily overwhelmed and overstimulated, which is tricky. That's just
Hmm.
hard.
Hmm.
Yeah. The other one that's not really a temperament thing, but more of a sensory thing, is, kiddos who need to be bounced rather than rocked.
Hmm.
That's always, it's not a hundred percent, but it's typical. The
Hmm.
parents like, yeah, I just spend all my time on the yoga ball. Like, I'm like, oh, okay,
Right.
right? Because those kiddos need it's like they need stronger input in order to settle
Hmm.
down. You can't work and soothe them down into sleep. It's like you have to overtop them with the stimulation, and then they'll calm down. I've seen, posts from parents who say, yeah, my kiddo needed to be almost like aggressively bounced on the ball,
Mhm.
like intensely.
Right.
Another one said they had to, what did they do? It was like they I think they sort of had to sort of toss the baby back and forth to each other, like this the sense
Wow.
of being airborne and falling was what helped that baby fall asleep. Yeah, it's
That's a
all over the
tough one,
place, but
especially if you're a
I
tired parent.
I know, right? Like, yeah, don't drop the baby.
Yeah.
Yeah, so any of those, and again, not every baby has all of them.
Mhm.
They're not going to have all of them, or they'll be like have a lot of one and maybe just a little of another.
Mhm.
But those are generally like the major group
Mhm.
of
Mhm.
temperament. As they get older, there's things that come online more.
Mhm.
Sort of emotional sensitivity, um, a kind of sense of sort of perfectionism, and things when they're
Mhm.
starting to be like in school or even in
Mhm.
preschool. Yeah,
Mhm. Yeah.
and you see that. Yeah.
So have you ever find that either or both of the parents are like that in an adult version?
Generally, of course,
Mhm.
yes. But what the interesting thing is, I think that parents, I don't think we spend, or grown-ups, I don't think we spend a lot of time thinking about temperament. I mean, it wasn't a thing when I was growing
Mhm.
up.
Mhm.
Or some of your attributes were criticized, right? Like, oh, you're just too
Right.
sensitive, right? So you learn not to be sensitive. Or, oh,
Yeah.
you're so stubborn, so you learned not to stand up for yourself. Um, so I think sometimes parents it's either not on our radar or we've internalized some kind of negative messages, and it takes having kids to learn about yourself. I remember I remember the day I was like, why are my kids so intense? And then it was like, oh my god, I think I'm intense. And I had literally no idea. um, and I think I'm just finding out now, the ways that I'm sensory sensitive, right?
Mhm.
Like you don't
Mhm.
notice, you don't see it as a thing. You
Mhm.
just are like, well, that's just how I am, right? Or maybe this is how people are, and you don't realize that it's not everybody does what you do.
Right. And, which is so funny that you said that about yourself because I know that you have a side hobby of theater and acting,
Yeah,
right? And
yeah,
you kinda have to have
right. A little
a little
bit,
bit of
yes.
intensity and like
Yeah,
that,
yeah. Yeah, to
s
be able to do that step. Yeah, it's just funny. I really always thought of myself as pretty easygoing
right.
till I had my children. And then I
Uh-huh.
was like, oh no, now I see all the ways that I
Mhm.
am reactive or intense or sensitive, because it all comes up as, in the process of parenting these kids,
Mhm.
it all comes up. And whether you like it or not, I
Right.
think.
Yeah.
Whether you want it to or not, it's gonna come up. Yeah, for sure.
Mhm.
So yeah, so all of these factors, the intensity, the reactivity, the sensitivity, the perceptive, every single one of those attributes affects sleep and the success of sleep training. Um, yeah. Were you gonna say
So,
something?
and we'll talk. I want to ask you a little bit more about that, of course. But
Yeah.
do you see? Because I've been asked this over my years. Parents will say, "Oh my gosh, Kim, are they going to end up with ADD or
I
ADHD?"
know.
It's real concern. I've been lucky enough
Right.
to have been practicing so long now that many of them are in college, the kids
Yeah.
that I
Oh,
helped,
interesting.
and they didn't no more than like,
Yeah.
the average statistic. If anything, I
Right.
have found they become, really intuitive,
Oh,
young
yeah.
adults and
Right.
very, can be very focused on like a mission, a project, a passion, very
Yeah.
intuitive about how, what the room is, how the feeling, how everyone's feeling, how they're feeling. And
Yeah.
still, even I see in my younger daughter a little, what I call like persnickety ness. Like she
Mhm.
likes things
Mhm.
just so.
A certain way. Yep.
I
Yep.
wouldn't say OCD or anything like that.
Right.
She has her
Yeah.
things and the other
Yeah.
things she's fine with,
Not so much.
but
Yeah. 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 Well, I think and this is just my hunch from
Mm-hmm.
knowing this field, is I really think ADHD, autism spectrum, sensory processing, giftedness.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's huge overlaps between all of those. I think it's massive, and I think that we're going to start it. Hopefully people will start pulling it apart, because ADHD, there can be parts of that that are actually sensory processing,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you're distracted by the dripping faucet in the classroom, it's going to look like you're not paying attention, but it's actually because that's taking your attention, right?
Yeah.
Giftedness can be misdiagnosed as all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
OCD and different vulnerabilities are in there,
Mm-hmm.
because if you're open, you're open,
Mm-hmm.
right? And sometimes these kids, again, as they get older, are able to detect and perceive things that are beyond their years, and they can really intensely internalize things. So
Mm-hmm.
it really is a package of like some phenomenal abilities and also some vulnerabilities. So it's all of it, I think.
Mm-hmm.
It does not mean they're going to have ADHD. It may mean that they have their brain is so active
Mm-hmm.
that they have a problem choosing which thing to attend to. Like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Is it actually ADHD? I don't know. I don't think so.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really, that stuff is really tough to say. Now, I
Mm-hmm.
can say that partly why I did my research was because there's the body of research on temperament in young children tends to draw a real line to some really negative stuff. It
Mm-hmm.
kind of all sounds bad. Like, oh God, if you have a fussy child, watch out, because they're way more vulnerable. You're going to be depressed. Like, it's
Mm-hmm.
terrible. And I started thinking, there's got to be some good stuff in there, and they're really not looking for it. I mean, really, it
Mm-hmm.
was like all the stuff was about risk factors, and I'm like, have they just not looked for positive stuff? And my feeling is, if parents, and I think parents do, honestly, I think parents do this, but if parents were able to also pay attention to the good stuff that's in there, it might help them cope with the hard stuff,
Yeah.
right? But here's the thing: I think parents do that, and
Mm-hmm.
I think it's the research that wasn't doing it,
Mm-hmm.
honestly. So I did this big survey, and I basically asked. I said, okay, we're going to look. In the survey was a little assessment of temperament, and I said, okay, of the kids that research would call, air quote, difficult, what else is in there?
Mm-hmm.
And sure enough, we saw that these kids scored higher on perceptiveness, higher on persistence, which you could say is negative, but I also think it's positive.
Mm-hmm.
Higher on the older children, higher on stuff like empathy, intuitiveness, sense of justice. So there was, like, it for sure showed some of the tricky stuff, but it also showed a lot of the really positive traits. So I did it hopefully to sort of inspire a different dialogue about temperament among researchers.
And maybe you could share with the audience how many people filled out your survey.
Oh yeah, we got
Yeah.
850 completed surveys,
Mm-hmm.
so that's a lot. So
Mm-hmm.
I think the first number was like, I don't know, 1,200, and then you have to get rid of ones that people didn't finish. But it was a good long survey,
Mm-hmm.
and so 850 is pretty significant in terms of a number.
And were those of parents of all different quote unquote temperaments, or did they have to
Yeah.
say, "Oh no, I think I have a"?
No, and in fact, no. It
Mhm.
was, the idea was that we just had parents of parents of infants, and then parents of children, because I initially wanted to have the parents of children be able to look back on the infancy and compare, like, have your sleep problems always been around, or is it new?
Mhm.
Has your child always been this way, or is it new?
Mhm.
I ended up not really doing that, because it's from a research perspective, having people remember something
Mhm.
sometimes is not great.
Mhm.
um, but we had, parents of children from 6 months up to 5 years old.
Mhm.
And it's just, yes, we just assessed temperament. So we had parents from the whole spectrum. Initially, I compared what I called high difficult to low difficult
Mm-hmm.
to see what the differences were. I had a statistician who said, really, that's not as strong as just looking at the whole group and saying, how much did temperament influence some outcome across everyone?
Mm-hmm.
And so, with that big of a number, you could see that temperament accounted for a certain percentage of the outcomes, or like for every increase in temperament, um, uh, perceptiveness increased half a point or something. So you could see that for every increment of temperament going up to difficult, it influenced this outcome on whatever the
Mm-hmm.
question was. So it's actually it actually came out, of course, hugely influential of every sleep problem there was. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, every single one, but also these positive attributes, which was really, it's really cool.
Yeah. We'll have to put
Yeah,
that like
yeah,
in, bullet and bolded so that parents can remember that.
yeah.
Because sometimes, it's helpful even to just print something like that out and put it on your fridge,
Right,
you
right.
know.
And the thing that accompanied that, the thing that I have to say kind of broke my heart a little bit about the whole thing, was that the parents of, the temperament also predicted lower levels of parents' own sense of their competence.
Mm-hmm.
So the parents of more challenging
Mm-hmm.
kiddos probably were working way harder and feeling like they weren't doing a good job,
Yeah.
which made, I mean, it makes your heart bleed a little
Yeah.
bit. But it
Totally.
also makes sense because stuff doesn't seem like it's working,
Mm-hmm.
because none of the advice was written about these
Mm-hmm.
kids. So parents are taking some book
Mm-hmm.
that says do X, Y, and Z, and they do X, Y, and Z, and it's like not even close to what the book says it's supposed to be like.
Mm-hmm.
And then the parent says, what's the matter with me?
Right.
Right? What am I doing wrong?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the part that I'd love to work with parents on, or at least get out in the world, is it's like, you may not get that feedback right away. But I think the feedback is in what you're saying, is where these kids are in high school or
Mm-hmm.
college and they don't have ADHD and they're not juvenile delinquents. Actually,
They're pretty.
they're super
Mm-hmm.
empathic and they're super smart and they're
Mm-hmm.
really creative and really divergent. And,
Mm-hmm.
your payoff, I don't know if that's what you felt, but the payoff kind of
Mm-hmm.
comes a little down the road.
Yeah. I always felt like my younger one, she made me a better sleep lady. And not that I, of course, was a perfect parent. Who is? There's no such
Yes.
thing.
Right.
Actually, we're not
No.
supposed to. It's not actually good for our children to strive for that. I
Right.
learned from another guest.
Right.
Um, but I
Yes.
really felt like she pushed me to be a better parent and to learn to figure out how to parent her differently than her sister.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that took time, and it took me
Yeah.
trial and error. Like, well, that doesn't work
Right.
for her. We'll have to try
Right.
something else,
Right. Yeah, but that takes I think that takes a really strong sense of self, because I think a lot of parents now are so advice driven. What's the advice on Instagram? What's the advice in books? And a lot of it's written, I think, to undercut parents' own instincts and their
Mm,
own ability to try different things. I think
yeah.
parents are afraid,
Hmm.
because they're afraid if they make the wrong choice, they're going to wreck their kid.
Hmm.
And so I know, at least when I work with parents, the moment that I say, look, you get to decide. If it's not working, what do you think is going to help? Or what do you think is the problem? What do you think's going on? And you can almost see, I don't know, some kind of reaction, like, I didn't realize I could do that.
Hmm.
Right. And
Hmm.
I think that's sad as well. I was going to say too, way back when we were doing some of the Dr. Sears stuff, and it was right when the reason that he wrote his Fussy Baby
Hmm.
book is he had six
Hmm.
children, six, seven
Hmm.
kids. And the youngest one, like all of them, I think had been mellow children. And he was like, look, this works so well. And then he had Hayden, who is the alert, he called her a high needs
Mhm.
baby. And he had to rewrite all of his stuff based
Mhm.
on this one kiddo that was so different from his other
Mhm.
ones. So I really tell people, like, look, if the advice isn't working, it's not you. It's because it's not working for your more sensitive, more intense
Right.
child. And you really need a different
Right.
approach,
Yeah.
I think. Yeah.
So, what do you think about that? Like, so now we've heard you, and you confirmed it through your studies, which, we
Yeah.
have learned in our practices and in our lives, both being moms of these live
Yeah.
wires. Um,
Yeah.
what did you learn about sleep other than that it was like a significant problem? And
Oh,
had
yeah.
most of the parents tried, extinction or graduated extinction
Yep.
or, yeah,
Yep.
please share.
Yep. They had tried a higher number of
Mhm,
things than other parents, and with less
mm,
success. So that both things came out as
mhm,
significant, that they had tried more approaches than parents of mellower babies, and they rated each approach as being less
mm,
successful. And at the end, I said, was anything ever successful? And they were more likely to basically say no, like they were still just kind of
mhm,
struggling through.
mhm,
I mean, I think there's lots of reasons for that. So, you know, the main, well, there's not a main thing. There's many things that I consistently work with parents on. So by the time they get to me, almost all the time they are ground down to a powder. They're just
mhm,
running on fumes. They have nothing left in their tank because they have tried everything, nothing works, and sleep is horrible, right? Plus, these kids require more from them during the day, too. This is not just a
right.
nighttime problem. Like, it is an around the clock, full court
Mhm,
press. They are wiped. Um, so they come to me pretty desperate and hopeless, I think. So there's a little
mhm,
bit of like, let's get the parent shored up a little bit and like held in some kind of way. Um, and then they're also just really shell shocked by crying, and all the freaking out. And um, so much of what they've been doing is just to reduce the fight and the
mhm,
conflict. So they're in usually really, I mean, I've had people who are doing bonkers stuff to get their kids
mhm,
asleep, but it's like, I don't care. I just can't
mhm,
anymore. I can't fight. I can't listen to the screaming. I just can't
mhm,
do it, which is super hard as a coach, because you're like, okay, I know it's going to get a little worse before it gets better.
mhm.
And sometimes when it's really bad, these parents are like, I can't do worse. We can't do
Right.
it. Right. So ideally, for parents who are listening, intervene before you get to that point, like reach out.
Mhm,
And right now, especially the tail end of this pandemic, people, even in the best of circumstances with small children at home, are probably struggling a
mhm,
lot. Um, so reach out for help, whatever that is. If it's mental health support, anything, you need resources,
mhm,
right? Yeah.
mhm,
So we have to shore up
mhm,
parents for sure, and then we have to, while we don't want to do crying it out, because these kids will cry for
yeah.
hours, right? They'll cry for hours. We want to go slowly and let parents know that there will be some fighting.
Mhm,
The kid, I always say that they're going to
mhm,
notice, and anything you do, these ones of any child, these
mhm.
will notice. So I think sometimes parents come and they're like, well, isn't there something like really like some little baby step? And I'm like, really? Do you think you're going to be able to change anything and have this child just be fine with
Right.
it? No. I mean,
Right.
like, when I say that, they're like, oh yeah, right. No, it's
Yeah.
not going to work. Um, so so anything you change is going to be massive. So that's okay. It's all
Mhm,
right. You're going to be right there with them. You're going to be coaching, and you're going to be soothing, and you're going to be picking them up to calm them down. But that first night is going to look terrible. I just tell them, I'm like, it's going to look like it's not
mhm,
working. It's going to look like a mess. And that is
mm,
okay. Because if you can push through and be really supportive for at least let's say 2 to 3 nights, you should see something
mhm,
shift. You'll see something
mhm,
shift. And sometimes I almost feel like that's some of the most important part of this whole process, is that these parents have felt so steamrolled by their kid that getting a tiny little bit of success is just like, for them, it's like water in the
Right.
desert, right? Because they haven't had
Right.
that yet. But I think the essential part of that is having a coach, having somebody help you with that. I hate, that's my personal
I
feeling.
mean, a lot of people have said to me over the years, like, well, Kim, if you write a book, then you won't have a practice. And I didn't find that to be true at all. I had very, very busy
Oh,
practice even after I wrote my book
right,
because uh,
right.
maybe because these parents had all these alert kids and they were burnt
Yeah,
out and exhausted and really hopeless, honestly.
yeah,
So
yeah,
often they would
yeah.
say, have you ever seen a situation this bad, Kim? Like, is there
Oh,
hope for us? And because they're sort of they're out of hope. They don't see a light at the end of the
right.
tunnel, and so if
No,
that's you, parent, like then you need that support from somebody who
right,
knows how to help
right,
you, who's been there sometimes themselves, and knows how to
right.
guide you through what I think should
Yeah,
be ideally a gentle process because I think these kids really,
yeah.
really need it.
They
Hmm.
really do. And I say nobody's learning anything when they're
Yeah.
hysterical. They're just not. This idea that there's learning happening when a child gets really
Hmm.
hysterical and you don't fully help them soothe themselves back down is just it- it's just not based in
Hmm.
anything. And it's definitely not about these kids. We have to go back to the research and know that virtually none of the research on sleep training has ever taken temperament into
Hmm.
consideration. In fact, there was one study that I can think of that said that they did assess temperament, and they said the difficult infants, remember, the difficult infants improved some, but not nearly as much as the
Hmm.
other kids. So that was like the one study that I know
Hmm.
about. So all that stuff on like crying won't hurt your kid, and oh, this will only take 3 days. Those are all about the other
Right.
children, not about
Yeah.
these guys. We know
Yeah.
very little about how these children go through sleep training and how much crying is
Hmm.
too much
Hmm.
crying, and all of that. So when parents have a book, and books don't give them a plan
Hmm.
B, right? Books don't say, well, if that didn't work, do
Hmm.
this. It's just like,
Hmm.
nope, if that didn't work, you did it wrong,
Right.
right? And which is a terrible
Right.
message. I think it does a real disservice to these
Right.
parents, for sure. Yeah,
So
100%.
I'm going to help think of the takeaway for this, and you tell me what else you want to add. One is
Okay.
there's hope. There is sleep
Yeah.
at the end of the tunnel. You might need
Yeah.
some extra support.
Yeah.
It might take a little longer, but it's
Right.
possible.
Right.
And
Yeah.
there's so many wonderful qualities that your baby, your live wire baby and child has that you might need to make your little list and remind yourself of at your darkest moments,
Right.
right? When you're really
Right. Right.
frazzled.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Exactly. And I mean, it is, you can move
Hmm.
sleep. You really can.
Yeah.
It's gonna, and it's okay for parents too to just settle for better. Like your kiddo may never hit the
Right.
targets, and it's okay to just improve
Yeah.
it some. My little takeaways about sleep, working on sleep, is pick your battles, but fight the ones you
Right.
pick. Right. Whatever you choose to change, just
Right.
do that. Right. Just
Hmm.
do that.
Hmm.
um, and then the next one is push through the
Hmm.
pushback. Right, we have to, in a gentle, supportive way, know that they're going to hate change,
Hmm.
and if we're doing what's age appropriate, and we're scaffolding them, and we're right there with them, it's okay to ask them
Yeah.
to change, because if you're in
Yeah.
burnout, that we know that that's not good for
Right.
anybody either. So it's okay to set the bar and say, I'm not going to make you do too much, but I got to make you do
Right.
something, because
Right.
mommy's tired.
Exactly. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, those were great takeaways.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you,
Yeah.
McCall, for your time and for
Sure.
sharing all of that you found in your studies that really
Yeah.
confirmed what you also experienced both as a mom and as a coach. So if you want to
Yeah.
read more about McCall and follow her on social media, just go to sleeplady.com/podcast and you'll see all of her information and links. And please don't forget to subscribe and write a review to my podcast so you don't miss the next episode. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Bye.